There comes a moment in life when you realize that not everything deserves your reaction. Not every accusation needs a defense. Not every storm needs your panic. Not every battle needs your strength. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is step back, breathe, and allow God to do what only He can do. The power of not reacting is not weakness, it is wisdom. It is choosing peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, and surrender over striving. It is trusting that God sees what you cannot see, knows what you do not know, and is already working behind the scenes while you stand still. When you stop reacting to everything that tries to provoke you, you shift from operating out of emotion to operating out of purpose. And that is where transformation begins. Choosing stillness over reaction positions you for God's intervention. It means you recognize that the first emotion you feel does not have to become the first action you take. Life will always present situations that try to pull you into impulsive responses. Someone may misunderstand you, disrespect you, ignore you, betray you, or provoke you intentionally. The temptation is to defend yourself, clap back, prove your worth, or match the energy that was sent your way. But when you pause instead of reacting, you create space between what happened and what you decide to do next. In that space is where wisdom speaks. In that space is where God can direct your heart. In that space is where peace has a chance to rewrite the narrative your emotions tried to create. Stillness is not about doing nothing. It is about choosing alignment over impulse. It is saying, before I respond, let me check in with my spirit. Before I speak, let me see if this will produce healing or more damage. Before I move, let me ask whether this is something God is calling me to fight or something He is calling me to surrender. Many people lose battles they never had to fight because reacting became more important than listening. But when you choose stillness, you are saying that obedience matters more than ego. You are saying that God's voice matters more than your pride. You are saying that you do not want to win the argument, but lose your peace. This kind of stillness requires trust. Trust that God sees what you cannot see. Trust that He will defend you when needed. Trust that He will reveal truth in His timing. Trust that He will open the right doors and shut the wrong ones. When you react from emotion, you are trying to control the outcome with your own strength. When you choose stillness, you are placing the outcome in God's hands. You are acknowledging that His wisdom is greater than your instincts. You are positioning yourself to receive His guidance rather than your reaction controlling the moment. There are blessings that only patience can unlock. There are breakthroughs that only self-control can protect. There are relationships, opportunities, and seasons that can be damaged beyond repair when reaction becomes a reflex instead of discernment. Stillness gives you the clarity to see what is really happening beneath the surface. Sometimes what feels like an attack is actually a test. Sometimes what looks like rejection is protection. Sometimes what feels like loss is repositioning. If you react too quickly, you may resist the very thing God is using to guide you into greater purpose. Stillness also teaches you to trust your worth without constant explanation. You do not need to prove who you are to people committed to misunderstanding you. You do not need to chase validation from places God never assigned you to. When you know who you are in Him, silence becomes easier. You realize that your identity is not up for debate. You realize that your value is not determined by how loudly you defend it. You realize that God will vindicate you in ways your words never could. Choosing stillness is a discipline. It may feel uncomfortable at first because reacting has become a habit, but as you practice pausing, breathing, and praying before responding, you begin to see the fruit. You notice more peace. You notice more clarity. You notice less regret. You notice that situations that once would have shaken you no longer control you the same way. You begin to experience what it means to live from a grounded place rather than a triggered one. You learn that silence can be strength. You learn that restraint can be power. You learn that letting God handle what you cannot control is not avoidance, it is surrender. Emotional reactions can sabotage blessings that patience would have protected. There are moments in life when the right thing is already moving toward you, but the wrong reaction pushes it away. Sometimes the door was opening, the opportunity was forming, the relationship was healing, the atmosphere was stabilizing, but the reaction came before the reflection. A word spoken too quickly, a decision made too emotionally, or a choice driven by insecurity can interrupt what God was trying to build. Emotions are real, but they are not always reliable. They rise fast, speak loud, and demand action, but patience invites you to slow down long enough to see the full picture before you respond. There are blessings that require maturity to maintain. If God gave you everything you prayed for without first teaching you self-control, you might mishandle the very thing you thought you were ready for. Emotional reactions can turn a misunderstanding into a conflict, a delay into discouragement, or a lesson into a spiral. But patience says, let me wait, let me breathe, let me ask God before I act. Patience allows space for truth to surface. It gives grace a chance to work. It prevents permanent decisions from being made during temporary feelings. Many times, emotional reactions come from a place of fear. Fear that you are not being heard. Fear that you are being overlooked. Fear that you are being mistreated. Fear that you are losing control. Instead of processing the fear, the reaction becomes the defense. But when fear drives behavior, wisdom takes a back seat. Patience, however, is rooted in trust. Trust that if something belongs in your life, you don't have to force it to stay. Trust that if God ordained it, He will also sustain it. Trust that you do not have to fight every battle to prove your worth because your worth is secure. There is a difference between responding and reacting. Reacting is immediate, emotional, and often impulsive. Responding is thoughtful, grounded, and intentional. When you react, the moment owns you. When you respond, you own the moment. Emotional reactions can shut doors that patience would have kept open. They can harden hearts that patience would have softened. They can destroy connections that patience would have strengthened. Patience is not silence out of fear. It is restraint out of wisdom. Think about how many times you look back and thought, if I had just waited, if I had just breathed, if I had just paused. Those moments teach you that patience is not punishment. It is protection. Protection from regret. Protection from misunderstanding. Protection from stepping outside of God's timing. Sometimes the blessing is not just what God gives you, but who you are when you receive it. If your emotions are always in control, then anything that triggers them can control you too. But when patience leads, emotional stability follows. It is also important to recognize that not every situation requires immediate action. Some things resolve themselves when given time. Some conflicts soften when given space. Some people reveal their true intentions without you forcing clarity. Emotional reactions can rush you into answers God would have revealed gently if you had waited. Patience keeps you aligned with His pace instead of pressuring your own. Your destiny is too valuable to be handed over to impulsive reactions. Your peace is too precious to be constantly sacrificed for the sake of temporary emotional relief. Your growth depends on learning to sit with uncomfortable feelings without letting them control your choices. Patience allows you to let the wave of emotion rise and fall without jumping into it every time. It gives you authority over your own spirit. It gives you room to choose wisdom over impulse, faith over fear, and purpose over reaction. This doesn't mean you suppress your emotions. It means you steward them. You acknowledge what you feel, but you do not allow it to dictate your actions. You invite God into the moment. You ask for clarity before movement. You recognize that blessings are fragile when handled with immaturity. You honor what God is doing by protecting it with patience, because emotional reactions might win the moment, but patience wins the future. You don't need to attend every argument you're invited to. Life will always present you with opportunities to defend yourself, debate, prove your point, or prove your worth. There will always be someone ready to misunderstand you, someone determined to misread you, someone who only hears what confirms the story already in their mind. And in those moments, the invitation to argue feels loud. Something inside you wants to correct, to clarify, to respond, to fight back. But wisdom whispers that peace is more valuable than being right. Protecting your spirit is more important than winning the conversation. Sometimes the real strength is choosing silence and walking away from what was never meant to hold your energy in the first place. Arguments drain you. They pull you into emotional spaces that distract you from purpose. They shift your focus from what God is building to what someone else is saying. Before you know it, your heart is heavy, your peace is disturbed, and your mind is replaying the conversation over and over, searching for better comebacks or stronger defenses. But when you refuse to step into every argument, you keep your peace sacred, you protect your mental space. You refuse to allow someone else's chaos to consume your calm. You recognize that not every voice deserves your response and not every attack requires your attendance. There is power in recognizing that some people argue to understand, but many argue to dominate. Some argue because they want clarity, but others argue because conflict feeds them. Some argue because they want to grow, but others argue because dysfunction has become their comfort zone. When you identify the difference, you stop wasting your breath trying to plant seeds in soil that has already decided it will not receive anything you say. You save your energy for spaces where your voice actually matters and where your words are met with openness, not resistance. Silence can feel uncomfortable when you're used to defending yourself. It can feel like surrender when you've been taught to always stand your ground. But silence is not weakness when it is intentional. It is protection. It is saying, I refuse to let this moment drag me into a version of myself I've outgrown. It is choosing maturity over ego. It is trusting that truth does not lose power simply because you didn't argue about it. Truth stands whether you defend it or not. God knows the truth whether you explain it or not. And your character will speak louder over time than your arguments ever could in a single moment. You also begin to realize that arguments rarely change hearts. Most people don't soften because you raised your voice louder. Most minds are not transformed by being debated into submission. Transformation happens through example, through consistency, through quiet strength, through the peace that cannot be shaken. When you refuse unnecessary arguments, you model emotional stability. You show that your worth is not determined by someone else's opinion. You demonstrate that you are anchored enough not to be moved by every accusation or every misunderstanding. Sometimes the greatest test is learning to let people be wrong about you. Let them talk, let them assume, let them create their stories. You don't have to chase every rumor, correct every narrative, or fix every perception. God can handle what you don't correct. Time will reveal what you don't defend. And the people who are meant to walk with you will recognize your character without you auditioning for their approval. You also don't need to attend every argument in your own mind. Sometimes the loudest debates are internal. You rehearse conversations that never happened. You argue with imaginary critics. You defend yourself to people who aren't even present. That mental noise drains your peace too. Learning to silence internal arguments is just as important as walking away from external ones. You remind yourself that you are safe. You remind yourself that you are growing. You remind yourself that you don't have to justify your journey to anyone. Walking away takes discipline. It means valuing your peace enough to disappoint someone who wanted a reaction. It means letting go of the need to be understood in every moment. It means trusting that God will vindicate you in his timing. It means remembering that your purpose is bigger than this moment and your calling is higher than this conflict. When you realize how precious your energy is, you stop giving discounts to conversations that do not honor your growth. You begin to choose where you speak, when you speak, and why you speak with greater intentionality. And in that restraint, you discover a new level of strength you didn't even know you had. Silence can be a spiritual strategy, not a sign of surrender. There are seasons when God does his deepest work in the quiet. Moments when the loudest thing you can do is say nothing at all. Silence is not always weakness. Sometimes it is wisdom wrapped in restraint. Sometimes it is the realization that explanations won't change a hardened heart, arguments won't soften a prideful spirit, and reacting will only pour fuel on a fire that God is trying to extinguish. Silence gives God space to speak where your words would only create more noise. When you choose silence, you are not ignoring the situation. You are allowing God to reveal what needs to be revealed without your interference. You are trusting that truth has a way of rising to the surface without you having to drag it there. You are choosing to protect your peace rather than participate in chaos. Silence is a shield. It guards your heart from speaking in anger. It guards your spirit from reacting in hurt. It guards your destiny from decisions made in emotional heat rather than spiritual clarity. There will be times when people misjudge your silence. They may think you are weak. They may think you are intimidated. They may think you have nothing to say. But silence is often the posture of someone who knows their worth so deeply that they don't feel the need to broadcast it. It takes strength to remain silent when everything in you wants to respond. It takes maturity to trust that God's voice will echo louder than your defense ever could. It takes faith to step back and let Him handle what your flesh wants to fight. Silence also gives you the opportunity to hear the truth within yourself. When you are always speaking, reacting, responding, defending, and explaining, it becomes harder to hear the still, small voice guiding you. But when you quiet your mouth, your spirit becomes more aware. You begin to discern motives more clearly. You begin to recognize patterns. You begin to see what God was trying to show you all along. Silence is not empty. It is full of revelation when you allow God into it. Sometimes silence is the boundary that reminds others they do not control your responses. You are not obligated to reply to every message, respond to every provocation, or engage with every conversation. Just because someone demands your attention does not mean they deserve your energy. Silence can communicate what words never could, that you refuse to be pulled out of character, that you will not be baited into conflict, that your peace is not negotiable. Silence says, I choose me, I choose growth, I choose to honor my spirit. There is also a strategic power in silence during conflict. When emotions are high, logic becomes low. If both people speak from a place of pain or anger, wounds deepen and bridges burn. Silence allows the storm to pass before you address the situation. It gives room for emotions to cool and for clarity to return. It prevents you from saying things that cannot be taken back. It helps you respond from wisdom rather than reaction. It is not avoidance, it is timing. Silence also teaches you humility. It reminds you that you do not always have to be the one to correct, to teach, to instruct, or to prove yourself right. Sometimes God will deal with things in ways you never could. Sometimes life itself will reveal truth. Sometimes the passage of time will uncover motives. Silence says, I trust the process even when I don't understand it. It frees you from the emotional burden of always needing resolution immediately. But silence is most powerful when it is partnered with prayer. It is not just closing your mouth. It is opening your heart to God. It is saying, before I speak to them, let me speak to you. It is taking your frustration, your confusion, your anger, and your hurt into His presence instead of into an argument. It is allowing Him to calm your spirit, align your thoughts, and remind you of who you are. Silence becomes sacred when it leads you back to Him. In a world that constantly pressures you to react, respond, defend, and perform, choosing silence is countercultural. It is refusing to be ruled by urgency. It is resisting the temptation to prove yourself. It is letting go of the need to control the narrative. It is recognizing that your value does not decrease when your voice rests, that your strength is not diminished because you chose peace over performance, that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is not made with your mouth, but with your restraint. So when the moment rises that begs for your reaction, remember that silence is an option. It is a strategy. It is strength wrapped in stillness. It is wisdom anchored in faith. And it positions you to hear God protect your peace and keep your spirit aligned with His will rather than being dragged by the chaos around you. God fights for you when you refuse to fight from the flesh. There is a battle that happens when you are mistreated, misunderstood, overlooked, or attacked. Your first instinct is often to defend yourself, to explain, to correct, to clap back, to make sure people know the truth. The flesh craves control. It wants immediate justice. It wants to prove a point. But there is a different kind of strength that shows up when you choose restraint instead. When you choose to step back and allow God to be your defender, you invite divine intervention into situations your emotions wanted to handle alone. There are moments when the greatest spiritual warfare is simply refusing to react the way the enemy expects you to. When the enemy can't destroy you, he will try to distract you. He will try to pull you into arguments, tension, bitterness, anger, pettiness, and pride. He wants you to fight on a level where you lose your peace, your focus, your character, and your sense of identity. But when you respond with spiritual maturity, when you choose prayer over reaction, when you choose stillness over retaliation, you remove the enemy's access point. You declare that you will not be controlled by emotion, ego, or insecurity. You declare that you trust God enough to let him handle what you cannot control. God does his best work in situations where your hands are not all over it. Sometimes the reason you are exhausted is because you have been trying to fight every battle in your own strength. You replay conversations. You defend yourself in your mind. You worry about what people think. You try to fix perceptions and control outcomes. But God never asked you to carry that weight. There are some situations that belong on the altar, not in your hands. When you release the urge to fight from the flesh, you give God permission to step in with his wisdom, his justice, his timing, and his power. Letting God fight for you does not mean you stay silent out of fear. It means you move from a place of peace rather than panic. It means you trust that he sees the injustice. He hears the conversations you were never invited into. He knows the motives behind actions, and he is perfectly capable of vindicating you in ways your words never could. When God defends you, the truth eventually comes to light. When God defends you, the right people see your heart. When God defends you, the outcome aligns with his will, not your emotions. Sometimes the greatest act of faith is walking away from the fight, not because you're weak, but because you know your identity is secure. You don't need to shout to be seen. You don't need to argue to be validated. You don't need to prove your worth to people who have already decided how they feel. When you rest in who you are, you can let God handle what people say. You can let him deal with motives, hearts, truth, and outcomes. Your job is to remain obedient, grounded, and surrendered. There will be seasons when God tells you to be still, not passive, not disengaged, just still. Still in your spirit, still in your emotions, still in your reactions, because stillness positions you to receive instruction. If you rush into battle without listening, you may find yourself fighting the wrong enemy, saying the wrong words, or stepping out of alignment with God's will. But when you wait on him, he will show you when to speak, when to move, when to address the issue, and when to simply let it go. God's way of fighting is different from the world's. The world says, defend yourself. God says, I am your defender. The world says, jet even. God says, leave room for my justice. The world says, prove them wrong. God says, I will reveal the truth in my time. When you choose his way, you may not see instant results, but you will experience lasting peace. You will learn that you don't have to manipulate outcomes. You don't have to chase validation. You don't have to exhaust yourself protecting your reputation. God knows how to take care of his own. Trusting God to fight for you is an anchor. It keeps you grounded when accusations rise. It keeps you calm when pressure builds. It keeps you stable when conflict surrounds you. You begin to realize that the greatest victories are won in the spirit long before they are seen in the natural. Prayer becomes your weapon. Peace becomes your shield. Restraint becomes your strength. And God becomes your defender in ways that remind you that you were never meant to fight every battle alone. Self-control is evidence of spiritual maturity. It is the ability to feel the emotion fully, but still choose your response wisely. It is the strength to sit in discomfort without letting it dictate your behavior. It is knowing that anger may rise, disappointment may sting, frustration may build, and anxiety may whisper, yet you remain grounded instead of reactive. Self-control is not about suppressing how you feel. It is about leading your emotions instead of being led by them. It is realizing that not every thought deserves your agreement, and not every feeling deserves your reaction. There comes a point in your journey where you begin to recognize the power of pause, that split second before you speak, before you move, before you respond becomes holy ground. In that moment, you decide whether you will react out of impulse or respond out of wisdom. This is where growth shows. Because immaturity reacts instantly, but maturity pauses long enough to ask, is this aligned with who I am becoming? Self-control is a sign that your character is being shaped. Your spirit is being strengthened. and your reactions are being surrendered. Many people want elevation without transformation. They want God to open doors, release blessings, and expand territory, but they do not want to discipline their emotions. Yet every new level requires a stronger level of self-governance. The more God trusts you with, the more control you must have over your responses, because opportunities can be destroyed by outbursts. Relationships can be damaged by careless words. Trust can be fractured by emotional impulsiveness. But when you are anchored in self-control, you carry yourself with steadiness. You move with intention. You speak with restraint. You live with awareness that your reactions are seeds, and every seed you plant grows into something you may one day have to face. Self-control also protects your peace. When you learn not to react to everything that pokes at your emotions, you experience life differently. You are not easily provoked. You are not constantly triggered. You are not tossed around by every offense, every comment, every opinion, every shift in circumstances. You begin to live from the inside out instead of the outside in. Your stability is rooted in something deeper than external situations. This is spiritual maturity, because it shows that your foundation is built on faith rather than feelings. Practicing self-control does not mean you never struggle. It simply means you refuse to let the struggle control you. You acknowledge your emotions honestly. You bring them before God. You process them with wisdom, but you do not let them drive the car of your life. You learn to breathe through the frustration. You learn to step away when you feel overwhelmed. You learn to seek clarity before acting. You realize that timing matters, tone matters, and intention matters. Every response carries weight, and maturity teaches you to handle that weight carefully. Self-control also humbles you. It reminds you that you are still being shaped. It keeps you from assuming that your first reaction is always right or justified. It opens the door for reflection. It allows space for God to correct you gently before your words wound someone deeply. It builds discipline into your daily life, not just in big conflicts, but in small moments. The discipline to hold your tongue, the discipline to walk away, the discipline to pray before you respond, the discipline to forgive when bitterness would be easier, the discipline to trust God with the outcome instead of controlling everything yourself. There is a freedom that comes with mastering your reactions. You stop feeling like a victim to your emotions. You stop apologizing for words spoken in heat. You stop living in cycles of regret and repair. Instead, you begin to walk in quiet authority over your own spirit. You realize that strength is not found in explosive reactions, but in controlled restraint. Power is not found in proving a point, but in preserving your peace. Growth is not seen in how loud you are, but in how disciplined you are when emotions flare. Self-control is a journey. Some days you will do it well. Other days you will fall short. But every moment becomes an opportunity to practice, to realign, and to grow. And as you continue to develop this spiritual muscle, you will notice your life shifting. Conversations will be healthier. Relationships will be steadier. Your inner world will be calmer. And you will begin to see that true maturity is not measured by what you know, but by how you live, how you love, and how you respond when your emotions are tested. Your peace is a boundary, not a suggestion. It is not optional. It is not negotiable. It is not something you protect only when it is convenient. Your peace is a sacred gift, and you are responsible for guarding it. There will always be people, environments, conversations, and situations that try to invade it. Some do it intentionally, others unknowingly. But either way, your peace must become the line that determines how close something or someone is allowed to get to your heart. When your peace is a boundary, you no longer tolerate what drains you simply because you feel obligated to. You no longer entertain chaos just to appear kind. You no longer sit in atmospheres that suffocate your spirit just to keep the peace externally while losing it internally. Peace is not passive. It is powerful. It is an anchor that keeps you steady when life is shaking. It is a filter that helps you discern what belongs in your life and what does not. When you allow anything that constantly disturbs your peace to remain unchecked, you teach your spirit to live in survival mode. But when peace becomes your boundary, you begin to prioritize emotional, mental, and spiritual health over approval, over pressure, and over people pleasing. Sometimes the hardest part is realizing that you are allowed to choose peace even when others don't understand it. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to distance yourself from toxic dynamics. You are allowed to step back from environments that make you anxious. You are allowed to protect your spirit from conversations that are harmful, draining, or disrespectful. Peace is a sign of alignment. When something continually disrupts your peace, it is often a signal that your spirit is not in agreement with what is happening. Your peace as a boundary also means you stop internalizing everything. You stop rehearsing every negative word that was spoken to you. You stop carrying guilt for things that were never yours to hold. You stop overthinking every situation until your mind is exhausted. Protecting your peace means letting go when your heart wants to fix everything. It means releasing control. It means accepting that you cannot change people, but you can choose what access they have to your life. There will be moments when choosing peace looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like distance. Sometimes it looks like changing habits, shifting priorities, or setting limits. Sometimes it means having uncomfortable conversations. Sometimes it simply means letting go of what you have outgrown. Boundaries do not make you cold, they make you healthy. They do not push love away. They protect your ability to love without losing yourself. You begin to realize that your peace is directly connected to your purpose. When you are constantly in chaos, it is hard to hear God clearly. It is hard to stay focused. It is hard to grow. Chaos becomes a distraction that keeps you emotionally reactive instead of spiritually grounded. But when peace leads your life, clarity follows, discernment sharpens, wisdom increases. You begin to see situations for what they really are rather than what your emotions fear them to be. Sometimes the greatest boundary you will ever set is with yourself. Guarding your peace means paying attention to your own thoughts, your self-talk, your inner narrative. It means recognizing when you are being too hard on yourself, when you are agreeing with lies, when you are feeding fear instead of faith. Peace comes when you begin to treat your inner world with gentleness, when you stop reliving old wounds, when you stop punishing yourself for past mistakes. When you extend to yourself the same grace you freely give to others. Not everyone will like your boundaries. Some people benefit from your lack of them. They benefit from your constant availability, your emotional labor, your willingness to carry what was never yours. When you finally begin protecting your peace, they may call you distant, changed, different, or selfish, but you are not being selfish. You are being a good steward over the life and mind God has given you. You are learning that love does not require losing yourself in the process. Peace as a boundary requires consistency. You don't set it once and forget it. You practice it daily. You remind yourself that chaos is not your home. You remind yourself that peace is not something you chase. It is something you choose. And the more you choose it, the more natural it becomes to walk away from what disturbs it. Your peace is your responsibility. It is the environment your soul lives in. It is the space where your faith grows, your purpose develops, and your clarity strengthens. And when you finally realize that your peace is a boundary and not a suggestion, you stop apologizing for protecting it and you begin to honor it as the gift that it truly is. Waiting on God is not inactivity, it is trust in motion. Waiting does not mean you are doing nothing. It means you are choosing not to force what only God can fulfill. It means you refuse to manipulate outcomes, rush timing, or panic your way into decisions that look right in the moment but cost you peace later. Waiting on God is an act of surrender. It is acknowledging that He sees the whole picture while you only see a fragment. It is choosing faith over urgency, wisdom over impulse, and alignment over anxiety. There are seasons when it feels like nothing is happening. You pray, you hope, you believe, and yet life seems still. But waiting seasons are often working seasons in the spiritual realm. God is shaping situations, aligning opportunities, preparing hearts, healing wounds, closing wrong doors, and strengthening you for what you prayed for. Sometimes the delay is not denial, it is development. God is making sure what He brings into your life does not break you, overwhelm you, or expose unhealed parts of you that would sabotage His blessing. Waiting on God requires trust, real trust, not the kind that only exists when things are going your way, but the kind that says, even when I don't understand, I still believe you are working. Trust says, if the door hasn't opened, it's either not my door, it's not my time. Trust believes that God's not yet is just as loving as his wise. Trust knows that God is too intentional to be random and too faithful to forget you. Waiting is also a test of posture. You can wait anxiously, bitterly, resentfully, or you can wait in peace, preparation, and expectation. Waiting on God does not mean sitting still spiritually. It means staying rooted in prayer. It means continuing to grow. It means becoming the person who will be ready when the blessing arrives, because the blessing may be big, but so is the responsibility that comes with it. God is not just preparing the blessing for you, he is preparing you for the blessing. There are times when impatience tempts you to settle. You start to think, maybe this is good enough. Maybe I should lower my standards. Maybe I should just take what I can get. But waiting on God protects you from settling for less than what he intended. What he has for you will never require you to sacrifice your peace, compromise your identity, or disconnect from him in order to keep it. If you have to lose yourself to hold on to something, it was never sent by him. Waiting also reveals what you truly believe about God. Do you trust his character or only his timing? Do you believe he is provider only when the provision is visible? Or do you believe he is faithful even when you cannot trace his hand? Waiting purifies motives. It exposes whether you want the gift more than the giver. It realigns your heart so that when the blessing comes, it does not replace God in your life. Sometimes the hardest part of waiting is watching others receive what you are still praying for. Their life moves forward. Their prayers are answered, their doors open, and you are still standing in faith. But comparison will poison your waiting season. Their timing is not your timing. Their journey is not your journey. Their blessing does not cancel yours. When you trust God's timing for your life, you stop competing and start resting. Waiting on God builds strength you didn't even know you needed. It develops endurance, patience, emotional maturity, and spiritual depth. It teaches you to rely on God rather than results. It stabilizes your heart so that when storms come, you don't crumble. You learn how to worship without evidence. You learn how to believe without seeing. You learn how to stand without guarantees. And that kind of faith is unshakable. Waiting is not always comfortable. There will be moments where you question everything, moments where doubt knocks, moments where fear whispers that nothing will change. But faith answers back. God is working even here, and when the time is right, God has a way of moving suddenly. What felt delayed suddenly becomes delivered. What felt silent suddenly becomes answered. What felt distant suddenly becomes present. And you realize that every second of waiting had purpose. So don't rush what God is still preparing. Don't force what he is still forming. Don't panic your way into something temporary when he is shaping something eternal. Waiting on God is not losing time, it is being positioned. And when God finally releases what he has for you, you will know without question that it was worth every moment you waited for it.